You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And as I mentioned last week, we are so delighted to announce the birth of our latest creation, Waking the Wild Heart. This is a journey into the wild, soulful depths of intimacy, love, and polarity. It's for both individuals and couples, and it's co-led by Jonathan and me. First program that we've run together for many years. I think at least 3, possibly more. And so we are so excited to be working together in this way again and to be creating something that is such a manifestation of our philosophy. What we really see works most powerfully with the clients that we work with one-to-one and when we work in either Wake the Wild Masculine or Wake the Wild Feminine. Ultimately, all roads lead back to this path of opening our hearts. So we are so delighted to create a program that is all about that. So you are either already in a relationship and are ready to create more juicy, fulfilling, and loving intimacy with your partner, or you're currently single and are ready to create a relationship of this kind. Together, we will free you from the conditioning that's keeping you closed and awaken you to the wildness of your heart, empowering you to express your desire and passion, enable you to open as divine love. We believe we can measure the extent we're living fully by how open our hearts are. Or differently said, living fully is living with an open heart. Are you ready to live fully? If so, we begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September, and enrollment is opening very soon. There will be limited places, and as ever, they'll get snapped up fast. So go register your interest now if you want to be one of the first to know when we open for enrollment. We already have a quite sizable interest list. There are likely to be a few spaces left, so get in there fast and register your interest. And then just as we open for enrollment, we'll come to you and let you know. And so if you know it's for you, you can make sure you get your space. The link for that is primalhappiness.co/WTWH. primalhappiness.co/WTWH, obviously short for Waking the Wild Heart. Really hope to see you in that gorgeous crucible if you're ready for it, if it's right for you. Now onto this week's show. It's with John El-Mokadem, my friend, and I believe 4th-time guest. It's at least 4 times, potentially more. John is a breakthrough coach, speaker, and researcher based in the UK. He has over 16 years of experience working with clients internationally, providing both personal and corporate coaching, training, and mentorship services. The transformation John witnesses are often life-changing as clients gain a deeper understanding of how their minds work, enabling them to experience a healthier, happier, more successful, and creative life. John has a specialty for helping people with various chronic health conditions, a byproduct of his own healing journey from chronic fatigue syndrome. It was this healing journey that led him to conduct a research study to demonstrate the transformative effects of this approach for other sufferers of CFS. The study has now been accepted for publication in an American Psychological Association journal after a full peer review process. Yay! Described by the journal editor as groundbreaking, the study results provide further empirical evidence for the efficacy of the 3 principles understanding to help individuals find greater mental and physical health. In this show, we explored what John and I have seen is the real power behind transformation and healing work. John shared his experiences from his years of work supporting people with chronic health conditions and his own healing journey. And I shared what I've seen in my work with clients and also my own recovery from chronic pain. We realized after we finished recording that we really wanted to emphasize that in no way are either of us saying it's all in the mind or blaming people for their struggles. We absolutely are not doing that. We both see this with deep compassion and empathy, and really only hope to provide some illumination on the things that we've seen can help free people from the grip of chronic conditions like this. I absolutely hope you find this a helpful and inspiring episode. Let's dive in. Hello, John, and a huge welcome back to the show.
Hey, Leanne, nice to be here again.
Yeah, I think you knew when we last spoke. Was it a couple of years ago?
Yeah, it must have been, 3 years ago, I think, something like that.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Gosh.
Time
Okay.
flies.
Wow. Yeah. So I think if I remember rightly, we did a couple of episodes kind of back to back, all about the work you were in at the time, about working with people who had been experiencing chronic fatigue syndrome and things of that ilk.
Yeah.
And the quite amazing work that you and, sorry, I've forgotten your partner's name in that work. Karen, that's it. Yeah. And the work that you've been doing. And I know that you've continued to work with people and, helping them to create shifts, healing, transformative change. We were talking before we started the show, like what should we call this? But creating that change. Yeah. And then kind of recovering their well-being, let's say. And I know you've continued in that work over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So there's probably lots to catch up on about that. And you've now had that paper about your study accepted, which is, again, really exciting in terms of like, wow, that's
been a long
cool,
that one. But it's nice to have it accepted.
Yeah. So I think there's so much in this, and we really were hoping in this show to, first of all, just dip back into what you've seen through that study and through this work that you've been doing, but then look at perhaps what that common ingredient that we're seeing is showing up actually in any time that we're working with people transformatively like this. I guess almost like the energetic basis that's at the heart of that. So you decide where you want to, which thread you want to pull first, and then we'll see where it takes us.
Well, I actually want to talk a bit about what I see is going on with people when they start to experience transformation, when people like you or I work with them. Because, having been around change work for a long time, but, especially, I sit and talk to a lot of people with chronic health issues. And, yes, it started out as being people with chronic fatigue, but then I quickly started to find myself chatting with other people with different kinds of chronic illnesses. And I kept seeing similar patterns going on. Irrespective of the condition, I saw, understandably, a lot of kind of fear and striving to, get somewhere to heal themselves, fighting against their predicament, a lot of busyness in their minds, trying to work out, well, what do I do? And it almost seeming like it was their job to actually take on their healing and take on the management of these things. And so because I kept seeing the same things going on with, people with different kind of health issues, I started to see, there's a common misunderstanding going on here. And irrespective of whether somebody is able to, get rid of their physical health issue, because I'm not convinced you always can. I want to be really clear about that. I can see that there is a space available to us that we can experience healing without being cured. Let's put it that way. Where we can experience more well-being, more grace, more ease with our lives, even if we've still got an illness. And what I see is that often, whether it's someone in chronic fatigue or somebody, with a different kind of health issue, often we don't see how important settling into this place of being healed and having more well-being. We don't see how important that place is in helping to create cure. Because, the more we are fighting to eliminate, fighting to get somewhere, fighting to be okay, we're stimulating a part of our nervous system that, undermines our healing. And whether even if you're doing all the right things, taking the right medications, doing the right treatments, having the right supplements, if that component is not addressed, then, it undermines all the good work that you're doing. So, to go back to what I said at the beginning, what is it that's creating change with people when I'm working with them? It's the fact that I can sit with somebody and know from my own experience of being, in a similar predicament, know that there is something available to them, that they can be okay even if they don't get better, even if they don't, eliminate the thing that they think they've got to eliminate. And because I know that, I'm seeing it on an energetic level. It's like you're presencing a health that is in that other person just because you see it, just because you can't get so involved in the story they would tell about why they've got to get rid of this thing in order to be okay. And so, yes, of course, there's a conversation that's occurring between me and clients. But I would say that the conversation and the words is so much less important than the presencing of that health that is inside of somebody else. And it is presence because you simply can't help but see it as a practitioner. You can't, I'm sure, you think about these people that come to me with chronic fatigue, they're going to fatigue clinics, they're going to doctors, and those doctors are, from their understanding, they're getting these people innocently to be afraid of the situation that they're in. They're feeding the fear that, unless you're careful and unless you're vigilant and unless you do this and do that, then something bad's going to happen and you're not going to be okay. Well, that's taking them again in the direction of more vigilance and fear and worry and concern. It is not taking them towards a place of stillness and peace and quiet and seeing that no matter what happens to them circumstantially, they are okay. So it is that energetic piece of being able to see the health in somebody despite what they tell you is a problem. And it's a big part of when I first do intake with a client, that's what I look for mostly. It's, they'll sit there, as you well know, they'll sit and they'll tell you what their problems are and what they need to be fixed. And I'm checking in mostly with myself when somebody's telling me these things. And I'm going, do I buy into this? Do I really think this is a problem, or can I see through it? And as long as I can see through it, for me, that's a big part of the work. Because if I can see through it, I am not going to be so distracted by the thing that they're bringing to the table. And I can keep shining a torch on what is constant, what is healthy, what is okay, what is always resilient inside of us. And that does most of the work from what I can.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm thinking how ultimately, even if the work and the thing that someone's coming to, say, for example, me to work on, looks remarkably different. Like most of my work tends to be with people wanting to create something in the world. So it could be, I don't know, a different way of being in relationship, for example, a different way of being in business. It's often like an expansion of kind of what they're they're reliable to create, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. So much of it is ultimately, and I was thinking the word you were saying, kind of like you being able to see their health. And I was thinking more and more, I'm recognizing that there is something in that seeing that is love. There is actually it's a loving awareness. It's not even just this pure seeing. There is almost like just an unconditional love that comes with that seeing, that I think, again, it doesn't really matter what that transformational change is. It comes from that ability to see them almost as that change, as that potential, as that possibility, no matter what the possibility is.
Yeah. They're coming to us very conditional. Like, yourself, when we go to coaches ourselves, we've got something and we're almost seeing ourselves as, well, I'm okay if, and we're going, well, no, you're okay. We can see unconditionally that they're okay despite whatever they brought to the table. So you're right. It does feel in a way like an unconditional love. I almost feel like when a client comes to me, I'm falling in love with them irrespective of how they are. And that comes from a seeing inside of us that, the potential for somebody to be okay as they are comes from the degree to which we see we're okay as we are, I think.
Yeah, I love that, because it's kind of paradoxical, because again, so much of what I'm working with someone on could seem as though it's counter to that, almost like we are working towards creating a vision, which would almost seem like that means you're not okay with where you are now because you'll only be okay at the end. But it's not. It's actually sourced in like their beauty, perfection, and then that becomes just like a fun thing to do. It's like from that place, why not create something like, hey, we're here on this paradise. Why not create cool stuff? But it comes from that understanding of like, that doesn't make where you are right now in any way wrong, broken, or anything else. Right. Quite the opposite. It's actually in the fact you've got this like innate genius that anything gets created from. But like the genius is like already there, perfect, whole, beautiful.
That's right. Yeah, I love that. And I love the way you described it as a play in the world. I mean, that's been very much my experience, that I didn't think that you could function and create cool stuff in the world unless you were somehow feeling a bit broken, feeling a bit like there was something wrong that needed to be fixed. And that would almost justify your going out and trying to repair it and sort it out.
Yes.
I didn't realize there was such a thing as, well, what if life is a perpetual creative process that is infinite? And what if, we can play from a place of just knowing we're okay? Well, that's how I've kind of found it. The more I've settled down into this place of just being more okay and not getting so caught up in my mind with its objections, there is a playfulness that comes up. I mean, even doing talks like this or talks to much bigger audiences, could never have done that in the past, because I would have felt like there was so much riding on me doing a good job and making a good impression. And like these days, it's not that I have a disregard for those things. I just kind of accept that, hey, you know what? Things don't always go well. And if it doesn't go well, I'm okay. But that means that I'm able to show up now and be more playful, be more present, be more at ease. And ironically, you seem to do better from that place. Who knew? Definitely not me.
No, me either. Sure.
That's what we don't see. A lot of people, when they get in these healing journeys, they think, well, if I'm not frantically thinking about this and trying to do something about it, I won't fix it and I won't be okay. Well, actually, no, being okay is your nature, is who you are. And you'll still be moved by a bigger intelligence to do things if you need to. But often there's less to do from that place. Often so much of the damage that's happening in our bodies physically is us trying to do so much to heal. And that trying to do so much is actually undermining the healing that just wants to come forth when we stop doing. Ironic.
Yeah. I love that. So I've got about 5 different questions I want to ask you. Let me just try and pick which order to ask you in. So firstly, I think I just want to presence that, and you did allude to this, I'm not saying that you didn't say this, but it's completely understandable that if you're in pain or, struggling with fatigue, of course, there is going to be this kind of very understandable desire to fix that, to change that.
Okay.
So, and I know that it's not like you skipped over that, like you did gesture that. I think I want to just presence that again, because it's, even someone hearing you say this, they're still going to be like, but how the hell do I be okay with the fact that I'm, I had chronic facial pain for 15 years, and I kind of did make my peace with it. And I think that is kind of how I was able to have a fairly normal life despite that, for, the point where I almost gave up and just said, you know what, I've tried everything. Doesn't look like this is going to shift. I just need to learn to live with it. I think that did actually create quite a shift for me, just in terms of, like, I was able to live a largely normal life as if it wasn't there. But I know that is can seem like a really challenging, almost like choice to make in the face of something which is really painful or really distressing or really a struggle. So I think I just want to first ask you, like, for people that are listening, so like, I hear you, but how the hell do I just stop that like desire to fix this, desire to change my experience? My experience is so flipping painful.
And I love the fact that you've said that, because I want to reiterate, I have massive compassion for people who are struggling with all kinds of symptoms, and I don't in any way want to belittle people's experience. I get it. I went through, all kinds of horrible symptoms, which I know are real and truly physical, and it's not an attempt to try and say, yeah, it's all in your head, or no, it's not at all. And what I can see is a few things. I suppose it's this: so much of what is creating our suffering with a symptom is the meaning we're making up about it, right? I mean, I did go through I think it was, when was it, 2018, I herniated a disc in my back. And I had pain like I'd never experienced in my life. It was horrible. I couldn't get comfortable in any position I was in, sitting, lying, on my front, on my side. It didn't matter. Pain was just there. It was in my leg. I couldn't walk properly. I was in my back as well. It was excruciating. And I remember that a huge part of my suffering was coming from all the things I was annoyed about that I couldn't now do because of this pain. Oh, this is getting in my way, and it's stopping me from doing this and that and the other. And so the more those things looked like things that I had to do in order to be okay, the more I fought against the pain in my mind. I was thinking about it. How do I deal with this? And how am I going to cope? And I didn't realize just how much of that pain was being perpetuated by my resistance to it. And I kind of had a similar situation to you, in that at some point I kind of clocked the fact that I was probably just going to have to change things for a bit and just deal with that. And the more I clocked that and surrendered to that truth, actually a lot of the pain started to subside, right? And I was surprised at how much of it subsided as my resistance to, changing my life and changing my circumstances, it just started to fall away. Right. So I think that's the first thing to say, is that a lot of the time, the pain is being perpetuated by what we're making up, or the symptoms in general are being perpetuated by what we're making up our lives have to be like in order for us to be okay. And the more we don't see through that, the more it creates more of a problem. Right. Now, what changes that? Well, for me, I remember Sydney Banks used to call this quiet space inside of us the ultimate answer. Right. And it's something I've come to see more and more, I suppose, as more and more important as time has gone on, because whenever human beings are striving to get somewhere, we are typically striving as a result of trying to get to this place of peace and quiet and well-being. And it's elusive. We never get there as a result of striving and trying. And it was something that I really saw during my own healing journey. I mean, I think I talked about this on the first podcast that we did a while ago, but, when I was really at the height of my illness in 07 and 08, surveying the wreckage of my life as it was at the time, I had this moment of just utter quiet descend over me. And it was whilst I was sitting with a yoga teacher friend of mine, and I didn't get it at the time. I didn't understand, well, how is it possible for me to be feeling this when my life is like it is? I mean, it's a mess. But I couldn't deny that I'd felt it. And the more I've come to see, that is the space that most of us are looking for. All of us, I would say. I'd go that far and say all of us are looking for that space. And we're innocently looking for it in the wrong place. But the more we start to see that it is who we are, it's our nature, underneath all of this thinking we've got about how our lives should be, the more we start to look towards that and see it for what it is, the more it starts to organically undo us from the nice ideas that our mind is making up about where we've got to get to in order to experience that place. And so it is the ultimate answer, because underneath trying, it's there, right? And the more you see it, the less you have to try to get there. And so for somebody struggling, it would be to gently point them to the fact that maybe there are two things at work. One, the meaning you're making up about the pain is duping you into fighting against it. But also, what if you could look towards a place where you could be okay, you could be quiet, you could be at peace and have well-being, and it not be the result of you achieving or getting somewhere or changing anything.
I love that. There's a couple of things that that's given me a kind of deeper sense of understanding of personally. So the chronic facial pain that I had lasted for 15 years. Like I said, probably a few years into it, I gave up looking for a cure. Like I even had a root canal that wasn't, like the dentist said, it's definitely not your tooth, but I was that desperate. I can be quite charming when I'm when I'm focused on something, and I convinced him to do a root canal on the tooth because I was just like, I have to try it. I can't give in to this. Like, I need to know for sure. And the only way to know for sure is to have the root canal. I'll do that. And of course, it didn't fix it. And it only got to the point where the next kind of stage of treatment was they were offering me anti-epilepsy drugs because they thought it was something to do with my nerve. And apparently this particular type of drug could, I guess, desensitize the nerve. And at that point, I'm like, this is feeling a little bit like, I don't know, almost like the so-called cure is actually feeling more problematic than the thing. And it was starting to get like, I don't suffer from epilepsy. Like, it doesn't feel good to me to be now taking anti-epilepsy drugs. Yeah. I'm a no. And that was like, for me, the final sign, like, and I had tried all sorts of alternative things and everything. So at that point, I was a no.
Yeah.
And so the bulk of this 15 years, I had completely surrendered to it. Like, it was just like, yeah, this is my life. I have my life. And part of it includes living with this chronic facial pain. Yeah. And then my father died. And that, as I've shared before on this show, that was kind of almost like a start of I suppose what you could call like a spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
But even though over the course of that year, I was having this experience of something beyond, like, the physical, I still had the chronic facial pain. And it was a year later, like a year after he died. So I'd had this like growing awareness over that year.
Yeah.
And then almost a year to the day that he died, I then came across, it was so funny because I spent so many years trying to understand what the hell happens in that moment. But I read a blog post that described, it said something like, thought creates your reality. And it was literally, I read that line and just something like went boom in my head. And it was suddenly I could see something before thought. And it was that moment that just created this like almighty shift that allowed me to see some, like basically what you're talking to, allowed me to experience. I didn't have the words quite then to explain what had happened, but I could suddenly experience myself before thought, experience myself from that place of just stillness.
Yeah.
And then about a week after that, I suddenly realized the chronic facial pain had gone all on its own. And I've kind of had theories about that over the years. And I think it was really, as you explained it then, I suddenly saw that much more clearly. Like that's really what happened. It was any remaining, I guess, thinking that was keeping that in place, like that old me in place, suddenly didn't make sense anymore. And I was experiencing myself much more from that deeper sense of unity, you could say, non-separation, whatever word you want to give to it.
Yeah.
And so that just really clicked into place. As you said that, like, oh, no wonder it had such a powerful effect. I mean, mostly, I'm just going to say this with a big caveat. I know mostly for people isn't quite as sudden or spontaneous.
No.
Like I don't think people typically have it like boom like that. It just happened.
No.
That was the way I was meant to. It isn't always that way. But ultimately, that's still the process that's happening. I think people get a sense of that other part of themselves, or that, again, whether you call it non-separation, unity, awareness, whatever. The other thing I was just thinking is, and I see this again so much with the work that I tend to do with clients, they've already had that journey often. As in, most of my clients have come from some form of spiritual path, often the three principles, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're already coming from like a space of understanding themselves in that way, like experiencing themselves in that way. Yeah. And going back to what we were saying earlier, I find that creates this like incredible foundation from which to play. It's like we haven't got as much on it. We're not risking as much when we know that ourselves in that way. Yeah. And to the extent where so much of my own personal focus and that the work that I do with clients now is actually discovering more of ourselves in kind of like that, what makes us unique. And that includes, our wounds and how we've ended up the way we are. And what can we discover about ourselves, like journaling like deeper into our body, into our soul, into the earth. Yeah. And I more and more realized recently how having a sense of ourselves from that, again, that unity perspective really helps us to do that, because it's kind of like that provides almost like an anchor or like a safety net where we can now go explore anything now, even quite scary, painful stuff, because we can know we also can return to this sense of like this other sense of me as being infinite and pure love and always okay.
Totally. It's a much more solid foundation for us to kind of connect to that place. I mean, when I'm doing work with clients, a big part of it is about getting them to touch that space of infiniteness, well-being, quiet, peace, whatever you want to call it, because that becomes something that they see is now walking around inside of them all the time. And no matter how bad an experience gets, to know that that's inside of us, to know that when our mind settles, we can, come back to that place. It takes away so much of the trying in our minds to figure out, well, how will I get there if I fix my life? Well, you never will. You'll never get there trying to fix your life. It's not there.
Yes.
It's before you try. But the more you see that, you can do things that seem more brave or courageous, or that maybe you wouldn't have looked at before, because now it's like, well, I get to play in that role, but good to know who I am. Good to know where this piece is I'm looking for. And that's, for me, a big part of why people do better for touching that space. Often we are limiting ourselves in what we'll do in the form based upon the degree to which we assess in our minds we can cope with the risk of that thing not working out and whether we'll cope with that.
Yeah.
Well, if we've got that space inside of us, we can pretty much cope with most of the outcomes that are going to happen to us. So Why wouldn't we go play? Why wouldn't we take a bigger risk? Why wouldn't we, do those things that look a bit out of our comfort zone? Because now there's less riding on it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I want to ask a question, which is going to sound is completely different direction to where we've just been, but
Okay.
I'm curious, and I'm sure people listening are going to think the same. What would you see is, this is two questions in one, actually. What percentage, roughly, of people you've worked with do end up being freed of the symptoms versus not? And what do you think creates that difference, if there is anything you've seen could be at play there?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, I think it's worth saying that I don't think human beings get rid of symptoms. I think we walk around and we're living in a meat suit that gets a bit bashed up by life from time to time, and as a result, gets symptoms. And I think, it would be inaccurate to say that people get rid of symptoms and then they're gone. So I think that's the first thing that needs to be addressed with people is no, you don't get to a place where you don't have any symptoms. Human beings have symptoms. That misunderstanding actually causes a lot of trouble, right? Because they're striving for something. I was striving for a place of perfection where I had no symptoms. Well, find me a human being that doesn't, right? So that's the first thing, is that we don't get rid of all our symptoms. We learn to see them from a different perspective. We learn to see the normality of symptoms. We learn to see that symptoms don't mean what we think they mean. So take, for example, people with chronic fatigue like myself. We typically, because of the name of the illness, we think that feeling tired is a symptom that is indicative of our capability and our energy process in our body. But actually, tiredness is not an indication of our energy. But that misunderstanding can actually lead it to look like it's an indicator of our energy, because what happens is if we feel tired, we then worry, oh, I'm tired and I don't have the energy to do what I need to do. So now we start this mental process of trying to manage what we're going to do to cope with the tiredness. That then uses up our energy and then confirms the idea that the tiredness and the energy are the same thing, right? So there's a need to clear up misunderstandings we've got about what symptoms mean and what is normal for human beings. So would I say that a large majority of my clients get rid of symptoms? I'm not going to say that that's true. Some symptoms do go away because a lot of them are a result of this overstimulated nervous system that is coming from overthinking. But a lot of people don't get rid of symptoms, but because they now understand them differently and they relate to them differently, they are now not engaged in a process of trying to manage them or control them or fix them. And as a result, they are now able to function much, much bigger lives, even though they may still have the same symptoms that they had when they first came to see me. So the problem is not so much that they have symptoms. And I know, again, that might sound like a really big thing to say, but actually, when you come to see them differently with different eyes, the way you relate to them changes. The way you behave towards them changes.
Yes.
And it's that change in behavior and the way you relate to them that starts to bring about shifts in how much they restrict you or not.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a spiral that you can kind of, the start of the spiral might always be there, but it doesn't then necessarily have to turn into the entire spiral down into the kind of the extreme of the symptom.
That's it. Because it's the misunderstanding about what the symptom means that actually causes the spiral to get dug down more. But when you start to recalibrate, well, does this really mean what I think it means? Might this be normal? Right? This is another thing that happens. Like when people, if you think about, somebody that doesn't have an illness label, if they go and try and do something that they're not used to doing, right? So I don't know, maybe if I go back to the gym and try and train like I did in my 20s, which would not be a good idea, but assume I did. Well, it's not going to be pretty for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt. It's going to be very, very uncomfortable. I'm going to have a lot of symptoms as a result of it. But all of that would be normal. So when human beings do more than they normally would, they tend to get symptoms. Now, somebody that is in a chronic fatigue sort of cycle, let's say, and this was me again, we would forget that. And so not only are we going into doing activity more fearfully because we're scared of the symptoms, but we're going in trying not to provoke more of them whilst trying to do more than we normally would.
Yeah.
So we're going and doing more stuff and we're going to get symptoms. But because we're now afraid of symptoms, understandably, we now get over-revved about those things. And of course, we get scared of it all. So we start to close the door on our ability to do more because we've now become disconnected from what's actually normal when human beings do more than they normally would.
Totally. There's two examples that have come to mind that I think you tell me if it seems like if these do relate to what you're saying. So one of them was I had Jen Lucas on the show years ago. This is like in the early days of the show, way back then. And she was talking about insomnia. And how she'd experienced insomnia.
She'd seen a lot into,
Yeah. And she'd spent, I think, decades. I think most of her adult life, she'd suffered from extreme insomnia. Yeah. And it was really interesting. Like I realized as we were talking that kind of similar to what you're saying here, that I'm generally someone who sleeps really, really well, has no problem going to sleep, like quite the opposite. I'm like, it's ridiculous how quickly I can fall asleep. And also if I'm in a situation where, I don't know, going to the cinema, if it's a bit too dark and cozy, I'll nod off, like I'm much more that way.
Films with me.
Yes. And realised when she was talking that the very rare times where, for whatever reason, I can't drop straight off to sleep, I don't really have anything on it. It's just to me like, oh, that's interesting. Like I wonder, sometimes it might be I've got something on mind, but usually it's when it does happen. Again, it's very few and far between, but it's not really a big deal. It's just like, oh, it just happens today. I'm struggling to get to sleep. No biggie. I do. Forgotten about. And realising like that, for someone who suffers from something like insomnia, that becomes a thing to then have a relationship to that's problematic. And that's really what she'd seen, that like every time that happened, she was making more of it than it could have necessarily been. And then it exacerbates. And so what you're saying really reminds me of that, like the symptom of not being able to go to sleep is actually probably a very common symptom. Yes. It's the relationship we then have to it, what we do with that. And the other thing that came to mind was how my relationship I used to have to having kind of like that anxiety feeling about doing something, like particularly for me, it would be some form of public speaking. It was, yes, I would get an extreme amount of nerves about it. But then I more recently have realized like I was actually more anxious about being anxious than the actual anxiousness was, if that makes sense, like the impact. Like I would worry so much. It was like I had so much fear about the anxiety. It just made the whole thing this entire mess. I couldn't possibly, like all felt bigger than me. Yeah. And the more I could realize like, well, probably fairly normal. I'm kind of pushing myself out of my comfort zone. I'm at my edge. Yes, come along with that is likely to come a bit of this feeling of anxiety. And that's okay. Yeah. That's okay. But like end of. And that suddenly created such a different experience of the same thing.
Yep. Like everything you said there, I completely resonate with. Yeah, like the insomnia, again, the meaning we make out of whether we sleep or not determines the degree to which we think it's our job to now control our sleep. And of course, you and I both know that really going to sleep is not something that we do in our... It's like you put your head on the pillow, at some point you pass out and that's it. But if you've got a lot, and again, totally understandably and totally innocently, I did when I was sick, I thought, oh God, yeah, the sleep that I get is really important to controlling this. And it was actually a really interesting statistic when we did the study, was that we found that we had people improving their level of function, improving their activity levels, improving their anxiety and their depression levels. But there was no statistically significant change in their level of sleep. And these are people with chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah.
So it showed that the problem was not so much the quality and the amount of their sleep. And let's be honest, yes, it's good to get a good night's sleep, but it was not as critical as we thought it was, particularly especially so with people who were suffering from a fatigue pathology. It was like, wow, that statistic isn't significant. And so it said, wow, this is so much more about how much we're making of the symptom than the thing itself. And again, same with your example about the anxiety. Again, totally something I resonate with. And it's something that a lot of people, when they're looking to expand their worlds and they've got a sort of condition like chronic fatigue, again, they've innocently got caught in an idea that they've somehow got to get rid of all of their scary symptoms before they can start doing more. Now, that idea causes a lot of trouble because now they're striving for this situation, again, understandably, but they're striving for this situation of eliminating all of their symptoms before they can go live their life. But they want to live their lives. And so over time, they get really upset and they go, well, I can't live my life because I've not got rid of the symptoms. And until I get that, I can't do what I want. Well, no, what if the path is just, you're going to start doing more than you normally would. And you're not going to feel great. You're going to get symptoms. You're probably going to have a lot of anxiety about spreading your wings because I don't know about you, Leanne. I went out today. I haven't been going out much during lockdown and it was busy. And I felt anxious. I was like, oh, there's cars and people are going to shops. And it felt odd and alien.
Yes.
In a
way.
way.
Totally. It's like a complete, like you almost have to figure out how to be in the world again. Like,
right. I'm
not equipped for this.
Yeah. And I'm like, but that's normal, isn't it? I haven't been in this world for, 12, 13 weeks, whatever it is now. Here, my nervous system hasn't caught up with
Yes. Yeah.
There are now people when you go outside.
Totally.
And I have to remind myself, no, John, this is okay. You're not like some weirdo, or it's just like, you're just not used to this anymore. So, that again, it's realizing the normality. It's normal for humans to experience transient sensations and emotions as they spread their wings, because their mind has to catch up to a new normal. It doesn't recalibrate that quickly.
Yeah, I love that. Something we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to, something you said earlier is one of the 5 things I wanted to ask you. So we're managing to get through them. You said something along the lines of, and this is going to be a real paraphrase, but something along the lines of letting the body's kind of intelligence do its thing. You said something along those lines, not exactly word to word. And I love that. The more of my work has been focused around, I guess what you could call embodiment, or kind of reclaiming our full sensual capacity. So we're like fully in life, fully attuning to the world through our body. The more I'm seeing how much the body is able to take care of itself. Like, again, like you just said, it's not like we actually our mind can make ourselves go to sleep. Our body does that. It's like one of the things the body does perfectly.
Yeah.
And a lot of the research on trauma, for example, shows that we can have a really traumatic event, and left to its own devices, just like all other mammals, our body will go through the process it needs to kind of shake that trauma off and then be perfectly healthy. Yeah. And it was, as you were talking about this, I was like, what if this is so too? Whether it be not one kind of traumatic event, but this, move into experience ourselves with fatigue or pain. What if, again, the body was able to kind of complete its cycle, whatever that looked like, and do what it needed to do? What would that look like? Because, again, I think anytime we're thinking, I need to jump in and do something to this, we're getting in the way of a cycle that would have just naturally played out in some way that would have been kind of,
My dog is agreeing. Sorry about that.
He knows wisdom when it hears it. But it's like I think the body is more and more, I'm seeing, not only are we wired for well-being, but our bodies are too. Our bodies do have this kind of like the healing is kind of part of the body's response.
Yeah.
And we can interrupt that or allow it to happen. And so I'd love to hear that's what I suddenly saw. Oh, this could apply here too. I'd love to hear what you think of that.
Yeah. There's two things I'd say to it. I think it is, it's definitely true from what I can see that there is an intelligence there that is much deeper than our thinking. And many of us have forgotten that, certainly me. I was somebody that lived in a situation of believing that life was in control by me in my thinking. And so, of course, when I got sick, it was like a logical extension of that understanding to try and take control of my healing and to try and fix it. Now, the nature of what was wrong with me meant that actually dug the hole deeper.
Yes.
Right? And a big part of my healing journey was coming to see, well, wait, John, there is something much deeper than your thinking that knows what to do and will drive you. And if I'm honest with you, my life ever since has been one of continually waking up to how much that is true in every area of my life. Whether it is the healing of my body, the building of a business, the knowing how to navigate parenting, or whatever it might be, it is seeing, wait, there is an intelligence before thought that moves my bones, that runs my immune system, that beats my heart, that digests my food. And the more I'm asleep to that, the more I try and take control of these things in my thinking, and it interrupts that intelligence that heals the body. So it's definitely a big part of the journey. But there is another part to it, which is really important to emphasize. And that is that human bodies get rickety as we get older, right? There are things that just as you lose your hair and you get a bit achy and, things do break. We get sick. And it wouldn't be fair to say that in every single case of somebody being unwell, there is a misunderstanding of how much they are getting in the way of their healing to the degree, and I don't think you were saying this, by the way, but the degree to which they were overthinking and trying to control stuff that it wasn't their business to control. Sometimes people just get stuff and it is not related to how much they're overthinking things. And so it becomes even more important for people to come to recognize that space that we talked about at the beginning of this call, which is, look, you know what? There is a space which is inside every single one of us where we are okay, where we are quiet, where we have well-being, and it is unrelated to our symptoms. And yes, the more someone is acquainted with that, the more someone is acquainted with this deeper intelligence, it sets the stage for healing, but not always. And if they don't heal and they don't get rid of their symptoms, well, it might just be enough that they've started to touch that space, the ultimate answer that we were talking about earlier in the call. They've started to touch that freedom that is available to them irrespective, because the fact is our bodies do eventually go. And so if we are constantly trying to, well, let me find the deeper intelligence so I can then get rid of the symptoms and then be okay. Well, now we're up in our head again and we're looking in the wrong direction. I hope that was clear. I'm not sure I've said that as clear as I could have done, but
no, absolutely. I think my sense of it is kind of like it's all at play simultaneously. So there probably is no like one answer that is totally true and therefore makes nothing else, like makes everything else redundant. It's kind of like all of this is at play. Yes. If that makes sense. Like there's some things that if the body was allowed to get on with it, it would deal with. And that's right. Not true for everything, because there's also going to be things like you say, where just naturally aging happens. And so that, the body can't go through a cycle of that, because there's a wider cycle, which is, going from birth to death. I think what you said, I think perfectly kind of contained that and then put it into like a bigger context, which I think is also really helpful. Like we can't expect our body to kind of get to dying and be the same, state it was in as a teenager, for example.
That's right. Yeah, it's not realistic. It's not in tune with the human condition. And also, it's really important for me that people don't hear any blame in what I'm talking about, because a lot of people have really suffered and gone through difficult times, and there's a way in which they could hear what we're talking about as almost blaming them for being in their heads and overthinking things and trying to control things. It's like, no, we're always doing the best we can with the level of understanding, and even if you saw through it, it isn't a guarantee that you would get rid of all your symptoms for all the reasons we just said. So there's something about being really compassionate and understanding about this that doesn't apply blame on people that's really important, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I absolutely know that's where you're coming from, and it's also where I'm coming from. But I think I think in a world which is often operating from a sense of blame and making wrong, either self or others, I think there's always real utility in just kind of reiterating that. So I'm really glad you have. I think it's a really good place to, totally, over and over again. Like, I feel like sometimes that's like so much my conversations with my clients is kind of bringing them back to like, and it's completely understandable and it's completely innocent and it's completely okay, because we almost can't hear that enough. Yeah, I love that. Right. So I think we're out of time, John, but this has been gorgeous. Where can people find out about you and your amazing work?
Oh, gosh. So we still have the current website, which is breakthroughthat.com. And there is a new website that is being made. I don't know if it will be ready by the time people listen to this, but the new website is just simply my name. So it's johnelmokadem.com.
Lovely.
I'll give you those links so you can put them in the thing. So.
Excellent. And they can find out all about how to work with you specifically around things like chronic fatigue, and also get details of your study there too, can they?
Yeah. So all of that stuff will be going up on the websites very soon. If they go on the Facebook pages we've got, then that tends to be where the most up-to-date stuff is. But as soon as we've got the publication date for the paper, we'll be making that available on the website and on the Facebook pages. So it's a bit of a watch this space kind of thing. But certainly the details of how to work with me, they're all on the website at the moment.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you.
No, pleasure. Nice to be here again. Thanks very much.
What a gorgeous show. Here are my best bits. Seeing the health, well-being and beauty in people is where much of transformative change comes from. What we label as symptoms are often a natural part of being human and don't need to mean anything untoward. And lastly, experiencing the space of peace and pure awareness is what takes the thoughts of needing to do anything to fix ourselves out of our minds. If you'd like to get the notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes at primalhappiness.co/episode 285. And if you want to be one of the first to know when we open Waking the Wild Heart for enrollment, then go register your interest now. And that's at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. And it's funny because I often feel this resistance to saying things like, it will sell out, spaces go fast. But I've learned like that tends to be what happens. And if I don't say that and you don't realize that it's worth kind of registering your interest so you'll know as it opens, then you're going to miss out. And I really want the people who are feeling that call towards it to be there if they can make that happen. So it likely will sell out. These spaces will likely get snapped up fast. So go register your interest if it feels like it could be for you. And that link again, primalhappiness.co/WTWH. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device as soon as it's released, as if by magic. And if you haven't already done so, I would love it if you could go leave us a rating and review. It not only absolutely delights my heart to read those rating reviews, it also allows other people to find out about the show and to decide if it's for them. And thank you so much if you've already done so. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.